Turn to Saeed Rahnema, Professor Emeritus at York University, a well-known writer on the Iranian Revolution. His most recent book, The Transition from Capitalism. One of the great things about York has been, and Leo's various associates, is building networks, and particularly often at York and through the Register and other things, it has been often building networks of left exiles from different political and social conditions, and then being part of these networks. One of the great things of Saeed and Heidi Magessi at York has been integrating us with many of the exile movements, left movements from Iran and the Middle East. We turn now to Saeed.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the organizers, for doing a great job indeed for this conference. Secondly, I've not been a student of Leo, for one reason, because I'm much older than him. And I was a student of Colin Lee's, of course. Not that Colin is much older than me, but we were in the same age range, when I was his student, and still I am. I would like to say that there is something special about the last paper of the last panel of a two-day conference, particularly in a long weekend, that everybody expects that the speaker would rush to the conclusion, so that in turn they rush for a drink outside. Ironically, this is the story of my paper, and deals with socialists who historically wanted to rush to establish socialism. My study is a part of a larger project. A section of it was a set of interviews that I did with prominent Marxists around the world, here with Leo Panich, Sam Gending, and Rob Alberton. And this book also was translated into Farsi, and it's also another part of it was published in another book section of, again, Alberton's Alternative Economic Systems. I start with this, that several key questions continue to confront anti-capitalist thinkers and activists. Specifically, what kind of alternative society are we hoping to replace capitalism with? And how and with whom are we going to achieve this? The answer to this question for some is very obvious, very clear. That answer is socialism through a revolution led by working class. This has been on the agenda in the past 150 years or so. And for some others say that we should wait patiently, for reform and then collapse of capitalism. I argue that none of these have worked, and then we have to look for other things. Learning from the past experiences of both revolutionary and reformist strategies, I argue that the post-capitalist society is only possible when a counter-hegemony at different national and global levels is established to replace capitalism with a superior socioeconomic system. I argue that there is no shortcut to socialism. The long and protracted process of transition to socialism involved a preparatory and transitional phase during the capitalist era, which I call radical social democracy, to differentiate it from the social democracies of the past, and also socialist, democratic socialism, which cannot be established during capitalism, which is the goal. The new strategies aiming at clear and workable goal will meld aspects of militancy of the revolutionary approach with pragmatism of incremental reform, what I call optimized radicalism. And I argue that most of revolutionary reformists failed because they did not have this optimum. Either they were too radical for a specific time, or lacked any radicalism. Now, on the first question, on what type of society? Marx did not elaborate on much on the transition to socialism. He expected that inevitable proletarian revolution would happen. We read, parallel to constant expansion of capitalist accumulation and centralization, grows the mass of misery, oppression, slavery, degradation, and exploitation. But with this grows the revolt of the working class, a class always increasing in numbers and disciplined, united, and organized. We know that these three trends did not occur in the same way. One is going upward, capitalism, but the other one for the strength of workers, this is not the case, it's declining. As for transition to capitalism, you know that he talked of the two phases, but these two phases were for post-capitalist society, not how to get to a socialist society. Here I focus on the first phase. The second phase, you know, the higher phase, the stateless, classless, with all other specifications that he puts for it, is, I think, the ground ideal that we should strive toward it, and it cannot be put on serious agenda of any political organization now. Lenin had somewhat more practical interpretations of this, on the basis of which we have the experience of several revolutions, you know, that started with October Revolution, that I think all of them failed. You know, I made a study of comparing 4 revolutions: Russians, German, Chinese, and Vietnamese. That I cannot go through the details of it. Actually, I'm going to present it in both in Beijing and Moscow in a few weeks' time on the conferences on centennial of October Revolution. On the basis of those experiences, I argue that the socialism that we strive for should have the following characteristics. First of all, should be practicable or feasible. Unlike art and literature, where sky is the limit, in politics, what is not practicable, what is not achievable, may not be that useful. We should have the ideals, but at the same time, we should walk on the ground. Secondly, it should be democratic. I believe the majority should embrace the ideals of socialism before forming a socialist state, not vice versa. Also, the third one is should be able to optimize different dimensions of national development that I put on 4 pillars of sometimes contradictory elements: economic growth, social justice, environmental balance, and political democracy. These 4 pillars for development. A most complicated issue historically has been public ownership, the question of public ownership of means of production. And we have tons of examples that each of these revolutions, they moved toward it, then they had to retreat from it, and then because they could not find the optimum level. Again, I use the term optimum because I also come from tradition of management and also political economy. So I think I like this concept that as a result of not having that optimum, they run into serious trouble. It also needs a state. Unlike what anarchists argue, and also here we have good references to the need for the state, we need to have a state, but this state would be very different. You know, this state would have limited hierarchy. It would be participative, and it will look for developmental vision rather than a central planning, and would control monetary, fiscal, and industrial policies. And then socialist participative management would be at all levels of organization through work councils, but work councils of a different nature, not necessarily worker control, because that has got its own problem that I will not go through it here now. Now, the second question is how? The how, either it has been revolution or reformist strategy. Revolution for Marx and Engels was, quote, a conscious and independent movement of the immense majority. Yet all the revolutions that were carried out under their name were not of this type, were more or less were led by a group of devoted socialists and communists, and in a sense acted as vanguard. So it was a sort of blankist revolution. As for reformists who were seeking gradual and peaceful transition, Marx also envisaged that. They faced other contradictions that I'm not going again into details as we have discussed it, and we had some panels yesterday on this. My contention is that following tactics and strategies that were either too radical or void of needed radicalism contributed to the failure of both revolutionary and reformist camps. A most significant issue is that the level of radicalism needs to be optimized based on the actual and specific subjective and objective conditions at the national and global levels. And global level is extremely important, that I get to it very short. Now, the third question is, with whom are we going to do this? Historically, the focus we know has been on the working class. However, the working class has gone through lots of transformations. The boundaries are not clear. And the highly segmented working class is extremely heterogeneous. Now, the once mighty industrial working class is now a minority among the working people. And as a result of automation, outsourcing, and also organizational changes in corporations, which operate through clusters of small organizations rather than afford these large organizations, it has impacted the size and also the power of the working class. So we cannot have the so-called proletarian fortresses that Lenin was referring to these industries. We do not have gigantic, in one location, factories that has got tens or 15 to 20,000 workers, at least in advanced industrial societies. Then there is the question of the sizable and large middle class. The left, I think, theoretically has had serious problem with analyzing middle class. Whether we consider as part of the working class or not, that's a different story, but the left has had this tendency of, on the one hand, exaggerating and romanticizing the role of workers and denigrating the role of the middle class, despite the fact that almost all left in any part of the world come from the middle classes, without exception in a sense. Then we have globalization and the gig economy, which has created cybertaria, a concept coined by our own Ursula Hughes and brilliantly analyzed. This has created a very different condition for workers. And the condition of work is changing. Now, according to ILO, over 75% of workers of the world are contingent labor, which they don't have traditional job, full-time, sort of long-term jobs with one boss. Aside from these, we have a sizable so-called, not only unemployed, but also the underclass. What Marx coined the lumpenproletariat. I mean, I have some problem with this notion, whether, you know of the major argument between Bakunin and Marx on this. In a sense, I do not agree with either on this, because putting aside these as lumpenproletariat has created a problem, and we have left them, in a sense, to be taken by the right wing and also populists and others. And of course, Bakunin had a problem because he considered this as flower of the proletariat, which was a nonsensical thing. All these has created a different situation that, in a sense, workers are not the only, the sole agent of transition. Aside from these, we have got other groups. We have identitarian movements. We have got women's movement, LGBTO, racial, ethnic, and religious minorities. All of these are suffering to different degrees under capitalism. So all these groups, to different degrees, form agents of transformation to capitalism, not just the workers and working class. Of course, managing this diverse group is extremely complicated and needs different tactics and strategies and organizations. Now, we come to the question of preparing for transition. In the same manner that Marx argued that some economic, moral, and intellectual aspects of the old society continues in the new one, some aspects of the new society must also have at least begun to germinate in the old society. And that's why we say that we need to have a phase within capitalist society before thinking of what will happen in the post-capitalist society. The overall political action model for the preparatory phase of transition to post-capitalist society includes a set of interrelated actions by and for a group of agents in different domains. It can be envisaged in a 3D matrix correlating socio-cultural, political, economic, and ecological domains on the one axis, with actions that include education, organization, and deployment, and also the agents which include working class, new middle class, identitarian groups, and some small and medium capitalists also. So I have a very fancy 3D matrix, but unfortunately I forgot to arrange it that you show it. You see it here. Political action in this regard, for these three, the cultural, political, and economic, while concurrent, are necessarily sequential. The focus is first on cultural domain, which includes challenging the dominant ideology and creating a countercultural hegemony, raising socialist consciousness and mobilizing working people to articulate higher aspirations in one of the main goals. With the conscious support of the immense majority gained, the focus will shift on the political side, which is taking political power, transforming electoral process, as Marx says, from an instrument of deception to an instrument of emancipation. With the new political power in place, changes to economic, social, and environmental policies follow. Economic transformation combines aspects of socialist strategies, vision building, and capitalist market economy, with the gradual dominance of former over the latter. Now, pivotal to this process is organization. However, this organization at different levels should be different from the typical organization that we have had so far. Not only we need organization at the workplaces, but also in neighborhoods, in city, regional, and national level. And learning from the experience of the past, these organizations should be democratic, participative, flexible, agile, and adaptable. For workplace organizations, democratic radicalized unions and work councils acting as particular arm of the unions for industrial process, industrial democracy process is important. As industrial and business workplaces become smaller and smaller and the number of full-time work shrinks, creating organization in working class neighborhood becomes more important, and mobilizing workers and unemployed and their families and others. These organizational activities are parallel to the formation of left political party or parties, and like Leninist type parties of professional revolutionaries based on democratic centralism and non-factions, the new political party would be democratic, least hierarchical, with as many factions as needed. Needless to say that socialism cannot be established in one country. No socialist economy can survive in a globalized capitalist economy, dominated by big imperialist countries and their international economic and financial institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and WTO, EU, central bank and others. The success of socialist system at the global level is dependent on socialist transformation in the powerful capitalist states and the transformation of international institutions. This relies on progressive states coming into power in a growing number of countries, particularly in advanced industrial societies, which at present have the strongest influence in global economic institutions. Such a development rests on progressive voters who can elect such states, which itself is contingent on the success of the left and progressive forces in mobilizing public support in favor of progressive candidates. This is no doubt a protracted and exceedingly complicated process. However, while it may seem utopian, it has a better chance of success as compared to the fantastical alternative of toppling capitalist system through political revolutions of avant-garde minorities, or the naive optimism of gradual reform leading to true socialism. A final point, while this model may not exactly fit in Leo's perspective on transition to socialism, it's definitely in line with his great concept of optimism of the intellect.
Let's go home.
Thank you, everybody.